entire families. In the Two Rivers, that often included 3 or 4 generations under one roof, including aunts, uncles, cousins, and nephews. Tam and Rand were considered out of the ordinary, as much for being 2 men living alone as for farming in the Westwood. Here, most of the rooms were on one floor, a neat rectangle with no wings or additions. 2 bedrooms and an attic storeroom fitted up under the steeply sloped thatch. If the whitewash was all but gone from the stout wooden walls after the winter storms, the house was still in a tidy state of repair, the thatch tightly mended, and the doors and shutters well hung and snug-fitting. House, barn, and stone sheep pen formed the points of a triangle around the farmyard, where a few chickens had ventured out to scratch at the cold ground. An open shearing shed and a stone dipping trough stood next to the sheep pen. Hard by the fields, between the farmyard and the trees, loomed the tall cone of a tight-walled curing shed. Few farmers in the Two Rivers could make do without both wool and tobacco to sell when the merchants came. When Rand took a look in the stone pen, the heavy-horned herd ram looked back at him, but most of the black-faced flock remained placidly where they lay or stood with their heads in the feed trough. Their coats were thick and curly, but it was still too cold for shearing. "I don't think the black-cloaked man came here," Rand called to his father, who was walking slowly around the farmhouse, spear held at the ready, examining the ground intently. "The sheep wouldn't be so settled if that one had been around." Tam nodded, but did not stop. When he had made a complete circuit of the house, he did the same around the barn and the sheep pen, still studying the ground. He even checked the smokehouse and the curing shed. Drawing a bucket of water from the well, he flipped a cupped hand, sniffed the water, and gingerly touched it with the tip of his tongue. Abruptly, he barked a laugh, then drank it down in a quick gulp. "I suppose he didn't," he told Rand, wiping his hand on his coat front. "All this about men and horses I can't see or hear just makes me look crossways at everything." He emptied the well water into another bucket and started for the house, the bucket in one hand and his spear in the other. "I'll start some stew for supper. And as long as we're here, we might as well get caught up on a few chores." Rand grimaced, regretting winter night in Emmons Field. But Tam was right. Around a farm, the work never really got done. As soon as one thing was finished, 2 more always needed doing. He hesitated about it, but kept his bow and quiver close at hand. If the Dark Rider did appear, he had no intention of facing him with nothing but a hoe. First was stabling Bella. Once he had unharnessed her, he put her into a stall in the barn next to their cow. He set his cloak aside and rubbed the mare down with handfuls of dry straw, then cured it with a pair of brushes. Climbing the narrow ladder to the loft, he pitched down hay for her feed. He fetched a scoopful of oats for her as well, though there was little enough left. There might be no more for a long while, unless the weather warms. The cow had been milked that morning before first light, giving a quarter of her usual yield. She seemed to be drying up as the winter hung on. Enough feed had been left to see the sheep for 2 days. They should have been in the pasture by now, but there was none worth calling it so. Buddy topped off their water. Whatever eggs had been laid needed to be gathered too. There were only 3. The hens seemed to be getting cleverer at hiding the sheep. He was taking a hoe to the vegetable garden behind the house when Tam came out and settled on a bench in front of the barn to mend harness, propping his spear beside it. It made Rand feel better about the bow lying on his cloak a pace from where he stood. Few weeds had pushed above ground, but more weeds than anything else. The cabbages were stunted, barely a sprout of the beans or peas showed, and there was not a sign of a beet. Not everything had been planted, of course, only part, in hopes the cold might break in time to make a crop of some kind before the cellar was empty. It did not take long to finish hoeing, which would have suited him just fine in years past. But now he wondered what they would do if nothing came up this year. Not a pleasant thought. And there was still firewood to split. It seemed to Rand like years since there had not been firewood to split. But complaining would not keep the house warm, so he fetched the axe, propped up bow and quiver beside the chopping block, and got to work. Pine for a quick, hot flame, oak for long burning. Before long, he was warm enough to put his coat aside. When the pile of split wood grew big enough, he stacked it against the side of the house, beside other stacks already there. Most reached all the way to the eaves. Usually by this time of year, the wood piles were small and few, but not this year. Chop and stack, chop and stack. He lost himself in the rhythm of the axe and the motions of stacking wood. Tam's hand on his shoulder brought him back to where he was, and for a moment he blinked in surprise. Great twilight had come on while he worked, and already it was fading quickly toward night. The full moon stood well above the treetops, shimmering pale and bulging as if about to fall on their heads. The wind had grown colder without his noticing, too. Tattered clouds scuttered across the darkling sky. "Let's wash up, lad, and see about some supper. I've already carried in water for hot baths before sleep." "Anything hot sounds good to me," Rand said, snatching up his cloak and tossing it round his shoulders. Sweat soaked his shirt, and the wind, forgotten in the heat of swinging the axe, seemed to be trying to freeze it, now that he had stopped work. He stifled a yawn, shivering as he gathered the rest of his things. "Sleep, too, for that. I might just sleep right through festival." "Do you care to make a small wager about that?" Tam smiled, and Rand had to grin back. He would not miss Beltane if he had had no sleep in a week. No one would. Tam had been extravagant with the candles, and a fire crackled in the big stone fireplace, so that the main room had a warm, cheerful feel to it. A broad oaken table was the main feature of the room, other than the fireplace. A table long enough to seat a dozen or more, though there had seldom been so many around it since Rand's mother died. A few cabinets and chests, most of them skillfully made by Tam himself, lined the walls, and high-backed chairs stood around the table. The cushioned chair that Tam called his reading chair sat angled before the flames. Rand preferred to do his reading stretched out on the rug in front of the fire. The shelf of books by the door was not nearly as long as the one at the Wine Spring Inn, but books were hard to come by. Few peddlers carried more than a handful. Those had to be stretched out among everyone who wanted. If the room did not look quite so freshly scrubbed as most farm wives kept their homes, Tam's pipe pack that travels a giant far strider sat on the table, while another wood-bound book rested on the cushion of his reading chair. A bit of harness to be mended lay on the bench by the fireplace, and some shirts to be darned made a heap on a chair. If not quite so spotless, it was still clean and neat enough, with a lived-in look that was almost as warm and comforting as the fire. Here, it was possible to forget the chill beyond the walls. There was no false dragon here, no wars, no eyes to die. No men in black cloaks. The aroma from the stew pot hanging over the fire permeated the room, and filled Rand with ravenous hunger. His father stirred the stew pot with a long-handled wooden spoon, then took a taste. A little while longer, Rand heard the washing dishes in hand. There was a pitcher and basin on the washstand by the door. On the high back, white water, with the sweat still to chill out, but that would come when there had been time to heat the big kettle in the back room. Tam rooted around in the cabinet and came up with a key as long as his hand. He twisted it into the big iron lock on the door. At Rand's questioning look, he said, "Best to be safe. Maybe I'm taking a fancy, or maybe
follow my lead.
Liking my mood." He sighed as bounced the key in the pocket. I'll see to the back door. That disappeared toward the back of the house. Rand could not remember either door ever being locked. No one in the Two Rivers locked the doors. There was no need. Until now. From overhead, in Tam's bedroom, came a scraping as of something being dragged across the floor. Rand frowned. Unless Tam had suddenly decided to move furniture around, he could only be pulling out the old chest he kept under his bed. Another thing that had never been done in Rand's room. He filled a small kettle with water for tea, hung it from a hook over the fire, then set the table.
Odin.
He had carved the bowls and spoons himself. The front shutters had not yet been closed. Time to time he peered out. But full night had come, dull as the sea and moon shadows. The dark rider could be out there.
My will is my own! My will is my strength!
Rand stared in surprise. A thick belt slanted around Tam's waist, and from the belt hung a sword, a bronze heron with a black scabbard, and another on the long hilt. The only men Rand had ever seen wearing swords were the merchant's guards, and land swords. That his father might own one had never even occurred to him. Except for the heron, the sword was a good deal like land swords. Where did that come from? He asked. Did you get it from a peddler? How much did it cost? Slowly, Tam drew the weapon. Firelight played along the gleaming length. It was nothing at all like the plain, rough blade Rand had seen in the hands of merchants' guards. No gems or gold adorned it, but it seemed grand to him nonetheless.
Enough!
The blade, very slightly curved and sharp on only one edge, bore another heron etched into the skin. Short quillins what looked like braid flanked the hilt. It seemed almost fragile compared with the swords the merchant's guards. Most of those were double-edged, thick enough to chop down a tree. I got it a long time ago, Tam said. A long way from here.
Enough!
I paid entirely too much. 2 coppers is too much, you see. Your mother didn't
Wrath
approve,
of
but
Odin!
she was always wiser than I. I was younger then. It seemed worth the price. She always wanted me to get rid of it. More than once, I thought she was right. That I
Well
should just
done.
give it away. Reflected fire made the blade seem aflame. Brand started. He often daydreamed about doing that. How can you give a sword like that away?
You are mine!
Tam snorted. Not much use in herding sheep now. Can't plow a field or harvest a crop. For a long minute, he stared at the sword as if wondering what he was doing with such a thing. At last, he let out a heavy sigh. But if I'm not just
Let's
taken by
go!
a black fancy, our luck runs sour. Maybe in the next 5 days we'll be glad I tucked it in the old chest. He slid the sword smoothly back into its sheath, wiping it with a grimace. The stew should be ready. I'll dish it out while you fix the tea. Brand nodded and got the tea canister. But he wanted to know everything. Why would Tam have bought a sword? He could not imagine. And where had Tam come by it? How far away? No one ever left the 2 rivers, or very few at least. He had always vaguely supposed his father must have gone outside. Mother had been out with a sword. He had a lot of questions to ask once they had settled the table.
My will is my
The tea water was
strength!
boiling fiercely. He had to wrap a cloth around the kettle's handle to lift it off the hook. Heat choked through immediately. As he straightened from the fire,
I will
a heavy
not
thump
die
at
a
the door
filthy
rattled the lock.
slave!
All thoughts of the sword, or the hot kettle in his
I
hand,
will
flew
not
away.
yield!
One of the neighbors, he said uncertainly. Master Daughtry wanted to borrow. But the Daughtry farm, their nearest neighbor, was an hour
Don't
away,
give up.
even in the daylight. And Oren Daughtry, shameless borrower that he was still not likely to leave his house by dark. Sam softly placed the stew-filled bowls on the table. Slowly he moved away from the table. Both of his hands rested on his sword hilt. I don't
Follow my lead!
again. The door burst open, pieces of the iron lock spinning across the floor. A figure filled the doorway, bigger than any man Rand had ever seen. A figure in black mail that hung to his knees, with spikes at wrists and elbows and shoulders. One hand clutched a heavy, scythe-like sword. The other hand was flung up before his eyes as if to shield him from the light. Rand felt the beginnings of an odd sort of relief. Wherever this was, it was not the black cloak running. Then he saw the curled ram's horns on the head that brushed the top of the doorway, and where the mouth and nose should have been was a
My
hairy
will
bone.
is my strength!
He took in all of it in the space of one deep breath that he let out in a terrified yell, as, without thinking, he hurled the hot kettle at the half-human head. The creature roared, part scream of pain, part animal snarl.
Take down the enemy!
Boiling water splashed over its face. Even as the kettle struck, Sam's sword flashed. The roar abruptly became a gurgle, and the huge shape toppled back. Before it finished falling, another was trying to claw its way past. Rand glimpsed a misshapen head topped by spike-like horns before Tam struck again, and 2 huge bodies blocked the door. He realized his father was shouting at him. "Run, lad! Hide in the woods!" The bodies in the doorway jerked as others outside tried to pull them clear. Tam thrust a shoulder under the massive table. With a grunt, he heaved it over atop the tangle. "There are too many to hold! Out the back! Go! Go! I'll follow!" Even as Rand turned away, shame filled him that he obeyed so quickly. He wanted to stay and help his father, though he could not imagine how. But fear had him by the throat, and his legs moved on their own. He dashed from the room toward the back of the house, as fast as he had ever run in his life. Crashes and shouts from the front door pursued him. He had his hands on the bar across the back door when his eye fell on the iron lock that was never locked. Except that Tam had done just that tonight. Letting the bar stay where it was, he darted to a side window, flung up the sash, and threw back the shutters. Night had replaced twilight completely. The full moon and drifting clouds made dappled shadows chase one another across the farmyard. Shadows, he told himself. Only shadows. The back door creaked as someone outside, or something, tried to push it open. His mouth went dry. A crash shook the door in its frame and lent him speed. He slipped through the window like a hare going to ground and cowered against the side of the house. Inside the room, wood splintered like thunder. He forced himself up to a crouch, made himself peer inside, just with one eye, just at the corner of the window. In the dark, he could not make out much, but more than he really wanted to see. The door hung askew, and shadowed shapes moved cautiously into the room, talking in low, guttural voices. Rand understood none of what was said. The language sounded harsh, unsuited to a human tongue. Axes and spears and spike things dully reflected stray glimmers of moonlight. Boots scraped on the floor, and there was a rhythmic click, as of hooves as well. He tried to work moisture back into his mouth. Drawing a deep, ragged breath, he shouted as loudly as he could, "They're coming in the back!" The words came out in a croak, but at least they came out. He had not been sure they would. "I'm outside! Run, father!" With the last word, he was sprinting away from the farmhouse. Hoarse-voiced shouts in the strange tongue raged from the back room. Glass shattered, loud and sharp, and something thudded heavily to the ground behind him. He guessed one of them had broken through the window rather than try to squeeze through the opening. But he did not look back to see if he was right. Like a fox running from hounds, he darted into the nearest moon-cast shadows, as if headed for the woods, then dropped to his belly and slithered back to the barn and its larger, deeper shadows. Something fell across his shoulders, and he thrashed about, not sure if he was trying to fight or escape, until he realized he was grappling with the new hoe handle Tam had been shaping. Idiot. For a moment he lay there, trying to stop panting. Coward fool, idiot. At last he crawled on along the back of the barn, dragging the hoe handle with him. It was not much, but it was better than nothing.
Rains?
Cautiously, he looked around the corner at the farmyard and the house. Of the creature that had jumped out after him, there was no sign.
Rains is a
It could be
sanctum
anywhere.
officer. He's
Hunting
been
him,
helping
sure.
us out.
Even
Why
creeping
are
up
you
on him
here?
at that very moment. Frightened bleats filled the sheep pen to his left.
You
Flock Mills was
traitor!
trying to find an escape. Shattered shapes flickered in the lighted front windows of the house, and the clash of steel on steel rang through the darkness. Suddenly, one of the windows
I
burst
put you
outward
on
in a
the
shower
path.
of glass and wood.
That was my
as Tam
focus.
leaped through it, sword still in
You'll
hand.
see?
He landed on his
Since
feet,
long
but instead of
before
running
we
away from the
met.
house, he dashed toward the back of it, ignoring the monstrous things scrambling after him through the broken window in the doorway. Rand stared in disbelief. Why was he not trying to get away? Then he understood. Tam had last heard his voice from the rear of the house. "Father!"
Rain.
he shouted. "I'm over here!" In mid-stride, Tam whirled, not running toward Rand, but at an angle away from him. "Run back!" he shouted, gesturing with the fist to someone ahead of him. A dozen huge forms screamed after him, harsh shouts and shrill howls shivering the air. Rand pulled back into the shadows behind the barn. There he could not be seen from the house, in case any of the creatures were still inside. He was safe, for the moment at least. Not Tam. Tam was trying to lead those things away from him. Tam tightened on the hoe handle, and he had to clench his teeth to stop a sudden laugh. A hoe handle. Facing one of those creatures with a hoe handle would not be much like playing at quarterstaff with Karen. But he could not let Tam
Take
face
down
him
the
chasing
enemy.
him alone.
Thanks.
Stalking around. They'll never hear me or see me. Eerie cries echoed in the darkness, and he tried to Soundlessly, he slipped away from the barn toward the forest, gripping the hoe handle so hard that his hands hurt. At first, when the trees surrounded him, he took comfort from them. They helped hide him from whatever the creatures were that attacked the barn. As he crept through the woods, though, moon shadows shifted, and it began to seem as if the darkness of the forest changed and moved too. Trees loomed malevolently, branches writhed toward him. But were they just trees and shadows? He could almost hear the growling chuckles stifling their throats while they waited for him. The howls of Tam's pursuers no longer filled the night, and in the silence that replaced them, he flinched every time the wind scraped one limb against another. Lower and lower he crouched, and moved more and more slowly. He hardly dared to breathe for fear he might be heard. Suddenly a hand closed over his mouth from behind, and an iron grip seized his wrist. Frantically he clawed over his shoulder with his free hand for some hold on the attacker. "Don't break my neck, lad," came Tam's hoarse whisper. Relief flooded him, turning his muscles to water. When his father released him, he fell to his hands and knees, gasping as if he had run for miles. Tam dropped down beside him, taking on one elbow. I thought how much he'd grown in the last year, he said softly. His eyes shifted constantly as he spoke, keeping a sharp watch in the darkness. Had to make sure he didn't Alex been here like a dog. Maybe better. But
The Bounty has no hold over me.
trail off. Not just the story. Not after tonight.
On your guard.
Those things could be Trollocs or the Dark One himself, for all he knows. Are you sure?
My will is my own.
I never saw
My
one
will
of them
is my
tonight.
strength.
Don't think when you have a little bit. Maybe enough to keep us alive. Listen closely. Trolloc can see better than a man in the dark, but bright lights blind them for a time.
This ends now!
That may be the only reason we got away from so many.
Enough!
Some can track by scent or sound, but they're said to be lazy. And keep out of their hands long enough, they should give up. That made Rand feel only a little better. The stories they hate men and serve the Dark One. If anything belongs in the Shepherd of the Night's block, it is Trollocs. They kill for the pleasure of killing, so I've been told. That's the end of my knowledge, except that they cannot be trusted unless they're afraid of you. And then not farther. Rand shivered. He did not think he would want to meet anyone at all he was afraid of.
Wrath
Still
of
hunting for us? No. They don't seem very smart. Once we got into the forest, I sent the ones after me off toward the mountains without much trouble. Sam fumbled
Well
at his right
done.
side, then put his hand close to his face. Best
I
act is
will
if they
not
are.
die a Bounty slave.
It's just a scratch. There's nothing to be done about it now anyway. At least the weather seems to be warming. He lay back with a heavy sigh. Perhaps it won't be too bad spending the night out. In the back of his mind, Rand had just been thinking fond thoughts of his coat and cloak. The trees kept the woods together, while a gust of truth still sliced like a frozen knife. Hesitantly, he touched Tam's face and winced. In a bit, lad. We don't have any time to waste. It's a long way in the dark.
You are mine.
He tried to pull his shoulder up. A groan barely stifled by Tam's clenched teeth made Rand hastily ease him back down.
My will is my
Hey, rest a while,
strength.
boy. I'm tired. Rand pounded his fist on his thigh. Snug in the farmhouse with a fire and blankets, plenty of water and willow bark.
Follow my lead!
Daybreak before hitching Bella and taking Tam into the village. Here was no fire, no blankets, no car, no Bella. Those things were still back at the house.
Let's
If
go!
you cannot carry Tam to them, perhaps you can bring some of them at least to Tam. Trollocs were gone. They had to keep them. He looked at the hoe handle, then dropped it. Instead, he drew Tam's sword. The blade gleamed dully in the pale moonlight. The long hilt felt odd in his hands. The weight and heft
Defeat is not an option!
He slashed the air a few times before stopping with a sigh. Slashing at the hilt easy. If he had to do it against a Trolloc, he was surely just as
Follow my
likely to
lead.
run instead, or freeze stiff, so he could not move at all until a Trolloc swung one of those odd swords,
Thank you. Thank you.
not helping him think. As he started to rise, Tam caught his arm.
Thanks.
You need the card, he said gently, and blindly. He was shocked at how easily he pulled his father's hand from his sleeve. Rest, and I'll be back.
My will is my strength.
He could not see Tam's face, but he could feel his eyes on him. Careful of the mouse exploring a hawk's nest, he thought. As silently as another shadow, he moved into the darkness. He thought of all the times he played tag in the woods with his friends as children, stalking one another, straining not to be heard until he put a hand on someone's shoulder. Somehow he could not make this seem the same. Creeping from tree to tree, he tried to make a flight. By the time he reached the edge of the woods, he had made and discarded it. Everything depended on whether or not the Trollocs were still there. If they were gone, he could simply walk into the house and take them. They were still there. In that case, there was nothing for it
Thanks.
but go back to sleep. He did not like it, but he could do Tam no good by getting killed. He peered toward the farm buildings. The barns and the sheep pen were only dark lights in the moonlight. Light glowed from the front windows of the house, though.
You are mine.
Let's go!
He jumped convulsively and
My
tried
will
to
is my
cry,
strength.
then cracked against the tree. This was getting nowhere. Dropping to his belly, he began to crawl, holding the sword awkwardly before him. He kept his chin in the dirt all the way to the back of the sheep pen. Crouched against the stone wall, he listened. Not a sound disturbed the night. Carefully, he eased
Take
up
down
against
the
the
enemy.
wall. Nothing moved in the fog. No shadows flickered against the lit windows of the house or in the doorway. Fell out of the cart first. Light slowly. It was the light inside the barn was
The
dark.
Beltsea have no hold over me!
He would have no way of knowing until it was too late. At least he would be able to see what was inside the house. As he started to lower himself again, he stopped suddenly. There was no sound. Most of the sheep might have settled down already and gone back to sleep, though it was not likely. But a few were always awake, even in the middle of the night, rustling about, bleating now and again. He could barely make out the shadowy mounds of sheep on the ground. One lay almost beneath him. Trying to make no noise, he hoisted himself onto the wall until he could stretch out a hand to get a shake. His fingers touched curly wool, then wetness. The sheep did not move. His breath left him in a rush as he pushed back, almost dropping the sword as he fell to the ground outside the pen. Shaking, he struck the wetness from his hand in the dirt. Fiercely, he told himself that nothing had changed. The Trollocs had done their butchery and gone. Repeating that in his mind, he crawled down across the farmyard, keeping as low as he could, but trying to watch every direction, too. He had never thought he would envy an earthworm. At the front of the house, he lay close beside the wall, beneath the broken window, and listened. The dull thudding of blood in his ears was the loudest sound he heard. Slowly, he reared up and peered inside. The stew pot lay upside down in the ashes in the hearth. Splintered, broken wood littered the room. Not a single piece of furniture remained. Even the table rested on another, two legs hacked to rough stubs. Every drawer had been pulled out and smashed. Every cupboard and cabinet stood open, many doors hanging by one hinge. Their contents, everything was rusted with white. Flour and salt, to judge from the slashed sacks thrown down by the fireplace. Four twisted bodies made a tangle in the remnants of furnishings. Rand recognized one by its ram's horn. The others were much the same, even in their differences. A repulsive melange of human faces distorted by muzzles, horns, feathers, and fur. Their hands, almost human, only made it worse. Two wore boots, the others had hooves. He watched without blinking until his eyes burned. None of the Trollocs.
Thanks.
They had to be dead. Tam was waiting. He ran into the front door and stopped, gagging him to stay. A stable that had not been mucked out in months.
My will
was
is
the
my
only thing he could think of
strength.
when he first met. Vile smears defiled the walls. Trying to breathe through his mouth, he hurriedly began poking through the mess on the floor. There had been a water bath in one of the cupboards. Scraping sound behind him sent a chill to his memory. He spun, almost falling over the remains of the table. He caught himself and moaned behind teeth that would have chattered had he not had them cracked until his jaw ached. One of the Trollocs was getting to its feet. A wolf's muzzle jutted out between sunken eyes. Black, motionless eyes, and all too human. Hairy, pointed ears twitched incessantly, except for one of his the same black mail the others wore, rasped against leather trousers. And one of the huge side-thrust swords swung at its side. He muttered something, guttural and sharp, and then said,
The Beltsea have no hold over me!
The words were distorted and hard to understand, coming from a mouth from a human speech. Its tone was meant to be soothing, he thought, but he could not take his eyes off the stained teeth, long
Just
and sharp, that
like
flashed
that.
every time the creature spoke. Narg knows some come back sometime. Narg, wait. You no need sword. Put sword down. Until the Trolloc spoke, Rand did not realize that he held Tam's sword wavering before him in both hands, its point aimed at the huge creature. It towered head and shoulders above him with a chest and arms to dwarf Master Luhan. Narg no hurt. It took a step closer, gesturing. You put sword down. The dark hair in the backs of its hands was thick like fur. Stay back, Rand said, wishing his voice was steadier. Why did you do this? Why? Belja de Garogda. The snarl quickly became a toothy smile. Put sword down. Not no hurt. Myrddraal, want talk you. A flash of emotion crossed the distorted face. Fear. Others come back. You talk, Myrddraal. It took another step, one big hand coming to rest on its own sword hilt. You put sword down. Rand wet his lips. Myrddraal. The worst of the stories was walking tonight. If a Fade was coming, it made a Trolloc pale by comparison. He had to get away. But if the Trolloc drew that massive blade, he would not have a chance. He forced his lips into a shaky smile. All right. Grip tightening on the sword, he let both hands drop to his sides. I'll talk. The wolf smile became a snarl, and the Trolloc lunged for him. Rand had not thought anything that big could move so fast. Desperately, he brought his sword up. The monstrous body crashed into him, slamming him against the wall. Breath left his lungs in one gasp. He fought for air as they fell to the floor together, the Trolloc on top. Frantically, he struggled beneath the crushing weight, trying to avoid thick hands groping for him and snapping jaws. Abruptly, the Trolloc spasmed and was still. Battered and bruised, half suffocated by the bulk on top of him, for a moment Rand could only lie there in disbelief. Quickly he came to his senses, though, enough to writhe out from under the body at least. And body it was. The bloodied blade of Tam's sword stood out from the center of the Trolloc's back. He had gotten it up in time after all. Blood covered Rand's hands as well, and made a blackish smear across the front of his shirt. His stomach churned, and he swallowed hard to keep from being sick. He shook as hard as he had in the worst of his fear. This time, in relief at still being alive. Others come back, the Trolloc had said. The other Trollocs would be returning to the farmhouse. And a Myrddraal, a Fade.
What?
The stories said Fades were 20 feet
guys.
tall, with
It's all
eyes
right.
of fire.
Rains is
And
a
they rode
sanctum
shadows
officer.
like horses.
He's been helping us out.
When a Fade turned
Why are
sideways,
you
it
here?
disappeared, and no wall could stop them. He had to do what he had come for and get away quickly. Grunting with the effort, he heaved the Trolloc's body over to get the sword. It almost ran when open eyes stared at him. It took him a minute to realize they were staring through the glaze of death. He wiped his hands on a tattered rag. It had been one of Tam's shirts only that morning. He got the blade free. Cleaning the sword, he reluctantly dropped the rag on the floor. There was no time for
The
leaving.
Bouncy has no
With a laugh
hold
that he had to
over
snap
me.
his teeth shut to stop. He did not see how they could ever clean the house well enough for it to be lived
On
in
your
again.
guard.
The horrible stench had probably already soaked right into the timbers. There was no time to do that. No time. No time for anything, maybe. He was sure he was forgetting any number of things he would need, but Tam was waiting and the Trollocs were coming back. He gathered what he could think of on the run. Blankets from the bedrooms upstairs, clean clothes to bandage Tam's wounds.
We're not here.
Their clothes and coats. A water bag that he carried when he took the sheep to pasture. A clean
We're
shirt.
not here.
He did not know when he would have time to change, but he wanted to get out of his blood-smeared shirt at the first opportunity. The small bags of willow bark and their other medicines were part of a dark, bloody pile he could not bring himself to touch. One bucket of the water Tam had brought in stood by the fireplace, miraculously still and untouched. He filled the water bag from it, gave his hands a hasty wash in the rest, and made one more quick search for anything he might have forgotten. He found his pole among the wreckage, broken cleanly in two at the thickest point. He shuddered as he let the pieces fall. What he had gathered already would have to do, he decided. Quickly, he piled everything outside the door. The last thing before leaving the house, he dug a shuttered lantern from the mess on the floor. It still held oil. Lighting it from one of the candles, he closed the shutters, but mostly to keep from drawing attention, and hurried outside with the lantern in one hand and the sword in the other. He was not sure what he would find in the barn. The sheep pen kept him from hoping too much. But he needed the cart to get Sam home to see it. The cart, he needed Bella. Necessity made him hope a little. The barn doors stood open, one creaking in the fingers, shifting the wind. The interior looked as it always had since first. Then his eyes fell on an empty stall. The stall doors opened. Bella and the cow were gone. Quickly he got to the back of the barn. The cart lay on its side, half the smoke broken out of its face. One shaft was only a foot-long stump. The despair he had been holding at bay filled him. He was not sure he could carry Sam as far as the village, even if his father could bear to be there. The pain of it might kill
Follow my
Sam
lead.
quicker than the fever. Still, he looked the only chance left. He He had done all he could do here. As he turned to go, his eye fell on the hacked-off cart shaft lying on the straw-strewn floor. Suddenly, he smiled. Hurriedly, he set the lantern and the sword on the straw-covered floor, and in the next instant, he was wrestling with the cart, tipping it back over to fall upright with a snap of more breaking spokes, then throwing his shoulder into it to heave it over on the other side. The undamaged shaft stood straight out. Snatching up the sword, he hacked at the well-seasoned ash. To his pleased surprise, Rick he cut through as quickly as he could have with his axe. When the shaft fell free, he looked at the sword blade in wonder. The sharpened axe was a dull snapping through that hard greased wood, but the sword looked as brightly sharp as ever. He touched the edge with his thumb, then hastily stuck it in his mouth. The blade was still razor sharp. He had no time for wonder. Drawing out the lantern, there was no need to have
My will is my own!
He gathered up the shaft, ran
My
back to
will
what he
is
had
my
left behind.
strength!
Altogether, it made an awkward burden. Not a heavy one, but hard to balance and manage. The cart shaft shifting and twisting in his arms as they stumbled across the plowed field. Once back in the forest, they were even worse, catching on trees, knocking him half off his feet. They would have been easier to drag, but that would leave a clear trail behind him. He intended to wait as long as possible to reach his path. Tam was right where he had left him, seemingly asleep. He hoped it was so. Suddenly fearful, he dropped his burden and put a hand to his father's face. Tam still breathed. The fever was worse. The touch roused Tam, but only into a hazy wakefulness. Boy, he breathed. Where is he? Dreams of days gone. Nightmares. Murmuring softly, he drifted off again. Don't worry, Brent said. He laid Tam's coat and cloak over him to keep off the wind. I'll get you tonight just as quickly as I can. As he went on, as much to reassure himself as the Tam sensed it, he peeled off his blood-stained shirt, hardly even noticing the cold in his haste to be rid of it, and hurriedly pulled on the clean. Throwing his old shirt away, he just had a bath. We'll be safe in the village at no time, and the wisdom will set everything right. That thought was like a beacon as he pulled on his coat.
Well done.
And bent to tend Tam's wound. They would be safe once they reached the village, and Nynaeve would cure Tam. He just had to get him. To the westward.
Take down
In the
the
moonlight,
enemy.
Rand could not really see what he was doing. But Tam's wound seemed to be only a shallow gash along the rib, no longer than the palm of his hand. He shook his head in disbelief. He had seen his father take more of an injury than that, and not even stop work except to wash it
My
off.
will is my
Hastily
strength!
searched his hand from head to foot for something bad enough to account for the fever. The one cut was all he could find. Small as it was, that lone cut was still grave enough. The flesh around it burned to the touch. It was even hotter than the rest of Tam's body. The rest of him was hot enough to make Rand's jaws clench. A scalding fever like that could kill, or leave a man a husk of what he had once been. He soaked a cloth with water from the skin and laid it across Tam's forehead. He tried to be gentle about washing and bandaging the gash on his father's ribs, but soft groans still interrupted Tam's low muttering. Dark branches loomed around them, threatening as they shifted in the wind. Surely the trolley would go on their way when they failed to find Tam and him. When they came back to the farmhouse, found it still empty. He tried to make himself believe it, the wanton destruction of the house, the sense
no hold over me!
that full belief in that. Believing they would give up short of killing everyone.
Follow my lead.
They could find was dangerous. A foolish chance they could not afford to take. Frolics.
You are mine!
Creatures out of the green tail coming out of the night to bash in the door. And a fade.
Let's go!
Light shine on me, a fade. Abruptly, he realized he was holding the untied ends of the bandage in motionless hands. Frozen like a rabbit headed in a hawk shadow, he thought scornfully.
Thank you.
An angry shake of his head, he finished tying the bandage around Tam's chest. Knowing what he had to do, even getting on with it did not stop him being afraid. When the Trollocs came back, they would surely begin searching the forest
My
around the
will
farm
is my
for some
strength.
crazy people who would have saved them. The body of the one he had killed would tell them those people were
Take
not
down
far
the
off.
enemy.
Who knew what a fade would do, or could do?
I will not die!
On top of
I will
that,
be
the thought
slain!
about Trollocs' hearing was as loud in his mind as the Tam had just said it. He found himself resisting the urge to put a hand over Tam's mouth and still his groans and murmurs. Tracked by scent. What kind of nothing. He could not waste time worrying over problems he could do nothing about. He whispered in his father's
Follow
ear.
my lead!
The Trollocs will be back.
My
Tam
will
closed
is my
his eyes.
strength!
Lovely Kari. Still lovely as a doll. Rand grimaced. His mother had been dead 15 years. Tam believed she was still alive.
Let's
It
go!
was even worse than Rand had thought. She kept him secret, and the silence was his life. Mother wants you to be quiet, Rand whispered. He paused to clear his throat of a sudden thought. She had had gentle hands. He remembered that much. Kari wants you to be quiet. Here, drink. Tam gulped thirstily from the water skin, but after a few swallows,
Thanks.
he turned his head aside and began murmuring softly again, too low for Rand to understand. He hoped it was too low to be heard by hunting Trollocs, too. Hastily, he got on with what was needed. 3 of the blankets he wove around in between the shadows of the car, contriving a makeshift litter. He would only be able to carry one end, letting the other drag on the ground, but it would have to do. From the last blanket, he cut a long strip with his belt knife, then tied one end of the rope to each of the shafts. As gently as he could, lifted Tam onto the litter, wincing with every move. His father had always seemed indestructible. Nothing could harm him, nothing could stop him, or even slow him down. For him to be in this condition almost robbed Rand of what courage he had managed to gather. But he had to keep on. That was all that kept him moving. He had to. When Tam finally lay on the litter, Rand hesitated, then took the sword belt from his father's waist. When he fastened it around himself,
My
it
will
fell out
is my
there,
strength!
made him fearless. Belt and sheath and sword together only weighed a few pounds, but when he sheathed the blade, it seemed to drag at him like a great weight.
You must not.
Follow my lead!
He berated himself. This was no time or place for foolish fancies. It was only a big battle. How many times did he take him without wearing a sword and having adventures? If he could kill one Trolloc with it, he could surely fight off any others as well. Only he knew all too well that what had happened in the farmhouse was an purest luck. And his daydream adventures had never included his teeth chattering, or running for his life with a knife, or his father at the point of death. Hastily, he tucked the last blanket around Tam, and laid the water skin and the rest of the log beside his father on the litter. With a deep breath, he knelt between the shafts and lifted the strip of blanket over his head. It settled across his shoulders and under his arms. When he gripped the shafts and straightened, most of the weight was on his shoulders. It did not seem like very much. Trying to keep a smooth pace, he set out for Emmons Field, the litter scraping along behind him. He had already decided to make his way to the quarry road and follow that to the village. The danger would almost certainly be greater along the road, but Tam would receive no help at all if he got them lost trying to find his way through the woods in the dark. In the darkness, he was almost out onto the quarry road before he knew it. When he realized where he was, his throat tightened like a fist. Hurriedly, he turned the litter around and dragged it back into the trees away, then stopped to catch his breath and let his heart stop pounding. Still panting, he turned east toward Emmons Field. Traveling through the trees was more difficult than taking Tam down the road, and the night surely did not help. But going out onto the road itself would be madness. The idea was to reach the village without meeting any Trollocs, without even seeing any if he had his wish. He had to assume the Trollocs were still hunting them, and sooner or later they would realize the two had set off for the village. That was the most likely place to go, and the quarry road the most likely route. In truth, he found himself closer to the road than he liked. The night and the shadows under the trees seemed awfully bare cover in which to hide from the eyes of anyone traveling along it. Moonlight filtering through bare branches gave only enough illumination to fool his eyes into thinking they saw what was underfoot. Roots threatened to trip him at every step, old brambles snagged his legs, and sudden dips or rises in the ground had him half falling as his foot met nothing but air where he expected firm earth, or stumbling when his toe struck dirt while still moving forward. Tam's mutterings broke into a sharp groan whenever one of the shafts bumped too quickly over a root or rock. Uncertainty made him peer into the darkness until his eyes burned, listened as he had never listened before. Every scrape of branch against branch, every rustle of pine needles, brought him to a halt, ears straining, hardly daring to breathe for fear he might not hear some warning sound, for fear he might hear that sound. Only when he was sure it was just the wind would he go on. Slowly, weariness crept into his arms and legs, driven home by a night wind that mocked his cloak and coat. The weight of the litter, so little at the start, now tried to pull him to the ground. His stumbles were no longer all from tripping. The almost constant struggle not to fall took as much out of him as did the actual work of pulling the litter. He had been up before dawn to begin his chores, and even with the trip to Emmons Field, he had done almost a full day's work. On any normal night, he would be resting before the fireplace, reading one of Tam's small collection of books before going to bed. The sharp chill soaked into his bones, and his stomach reminded him that he had had nothing to eat since Mr. Salvere's honey cakes. He muttered to himself, angry at not taking some food at the farm. A few minutes more could not have made any difference. A few minutes to find some bread and cheese. The Trollocs would not have come back in just a few minutes more. Or just the bread. Of course, Mr. Salvere would insist on putting a hot meal in front of him once they reached the inn. A steaming plate of her thick lamb stew, probably. And some of that bread she had been baking. And lots of hot tea. They came over the dragon wall like a flood, Tam said suddenly, in a strong, angry voice, and washed the land with blood. How many died for Lemon's sin? Rand almost fell from surprise. Wearily, he lowered the litter to the ground and untangled himself. The strip of blanket left a burning groove in his shoulders. Struggling to work the knots out, he knelt beside Tam. Fumbling for the water bag, he peered through the trees, trying vainly in the dim moonlight to see up and down the road, not 20 paces away. Nothing moved there but shadows. Nothing but shadows. There isn't any flood of Trollocs, Father. Not now, anyway. We'll be safe in Emmons Field soon. Drink a little water. Tam brushed aside the water bag with an arm that seemed to have regained all of its strength. He seized Rand's collar, pulling him close enough to feel the heat of his father's fever in his own cheek. They called them savages, Tam said urgently. The fools said they could be swept aside like rubbish. How many battles, how many cities burned before they faced the truth, before the nations stood together against them?
Too light to say.
Sadness filled his voice.
Appreciate it.
Mara, carpeted with the dead. And no sound but the cries of ravens and the buzzing of flies.
The Bounty has
Toplet
no
towers
hold over me!
burning in the night like torches. All the way to the shining walls they burned and slew before they were turned back. All the way to... Rand clamped a hand over his father's mouth. The sound came again. A rhythmic thudding, directionless in the trees. Fading, then growing stronger again as the wind shifted. Frowning, he turned his head slowly, trying to decide what his hand.
Follow my lead!
Caught the corner of his eye, and in an instant he was crouched over Tam. He was startled to feel the hilt of a sword clutched tight in his hand. But most of them concentrated on the quarry road, as if the road were the only real thing in the entire world. Wavering shadows to the east slowly resolved themselves into a horse and rider, followed up the road by tall, bulky shapes trotting to keep up with the animal. The pale light of the moon glittered through spearheads and axe blades. Rand never even considered they might be villagers coming to help. He knew what they were. He could feel it, like grit scraping his bones, even before they drew close enough for moonlight to reveal the hooded cloak swathing the horseman, a cloak that hung undisturbed by the wind. All of the shapes appeared black in the night, and the horses' hooves made the same sounds that any others would. But Rand knew this horse as any other. Behind the Dark Rider came nightmare forms with horns and muzzles and beaks. Trollocs in a double file, all in steps, hooves and hooves, striking the ground at the same instant as if obeying a single line. Rand counted 20 as they ran past. He wondered what kind of man would dare turn his back on so many Trollocs. Or on one.
Thanks.
The trotting column disappeared westward, thumping footfalls fading into the darkness. But Rand remained where he was, not moving a muscle except breathing. Something told him to be certain, absolutely certain. They were gone before he moved. At long last, he drew a deep breath and began to straighten. This time the horse didn't sound at all. In eerie silence, the Dark Rider returned, his shadowy mount stopping every few steps as it walked slowly back down the road. The wind gusted higher, moaning through the trees. The horseman's cloak lay still as death. Whenever the horse halted, that hooded head flung from side to side as the rider peered into the forest, searching. Exactly opposite Rand, the horse stopped again, the shattered opening of the hood turning toward where he crouched above his father. Rand's hands tightened convulsively on the sword hilt. He felt the gaze, just as he had that morning, shivered again, even if he could not see it. That shrouded man hated everyone and everything. Everything that lived. Despite the cold wind, sweat beaded on Rand's face. Then the horse was moving on, and we down the steps and stopped. Until all Rand could see was a barely distinguishable blur of night far down the road. It could have been anything, but he had not taken his eyes off it for a second. If he lost it, he was afraid the next time he saw the black-coated rider might be when that silent horse was on top of him. Abruptly, the shadow was rushing back, passing him in a silent gallop. The rider looked only ahead of him as he sped westward into the night, toward the mountains of mist, toward the farm. Ran fast, stopping air and scrubbing cold sweat off his face with his sleeve. He did not care anymore about why the Trollocs had come. If he never found out why, they would be fine. Just as long as it was all ended. With a shake, he gathered himself, hastily checking his father. He was murmuring, but so softly, Rand could not make out the words. He tried to give him a drink, but the water spilled over his father's chin. Tam coughed and choked on the trickle that made it into his mouth, then began muttering again, as if there had not been any interruption. Rand splashed a little more water on the cloth on Tam's forehead, pushed the water bag back on the litter, and scrambled his feet fast again. He started out as if he had had a good night's sleep. The new strength did not last
Well
long.
done.
Fear masked his tiredness in the beginning, but though the fear remained, the
My
mask
will
melted
is
away.
my own.
Soon he was back to stumbling
My
forward,
will is my
trying to
strength.
ignore hunger and aching muscles. He concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other without tripping. In his mind, he pictured Evan's field, shutters coming back, and the houses lit for winter. People shouting greetings as they passed back and forth on their visits. Fiddles filling the streets, with James following.
Thanks.
And Heron on the wing. Harald Luhan would have one too many brandies and start singing "The Wind in the Barley" in a voice like a bullfrog. He always did, until his wife managed to shush him. And Senbui would decide to prove he could still dance as well as ever. Matt would have something planned that would not quite happen the way he intended. And everybody would know he was responsible, but no one would prove it. He could almost smile thinking about how it would be.
The Melzi have no hold over me.
I think it is sort of... It sort of makes no sense. But they brought a cutting to carry in.
I will not die a Melzi
It's a
slave.
wonder for the king. Though he sounded angry, he was barely
Melzi
loud
have
enough
no
to
hold
answer.
over me.
Anyone who could hear him would be able to hear the litter scraping across the ground, too. Rand kept on, only half listened. They'll never make peace. Never. They brought a sapling.
Follow my lead.
500 years it grew. 500 years of peace with those who make no peace with strangers. Why did he cut it down? Why? Blood was the price for Avendor Aldera. Blood the price for
My will is my strength.
Faded off into muttering once more. Tiredly, Rand wondered what fever dream Tam could be having now. Avendor. The Tree of Life was supposed to have all sorts of miraculous qualities, but none of the stories mentioned any sapling, or any they. There was only the one, and that belonged to the Green Man. Only that morning he might have felt foolish at musing over the Green Man and the Tree of Life. They were only stories. Were they? Trollocs were just stories. Maybe all the stories were as real as the news the peddlers and merchants brought. All the Gleeman's tales and all the stories told at night in front of the fireplace. Next you might actually meet the Green Man.
Give it your
Or
best.
an Ogier giant. Or a wild, black-veiled Aiel man. Tam was talking again, he realized. Sometimes only murmuring, sometimes loud enough to understand. From time to time, he stopped to
My
pant for
will
breath.
is my
Then went
strength.
down as if he thought he had been sleeping all night.
Got your back.
Battles are always hot,
Appreciate.
even in the snow. Sweat heat, blood heat, and death heat. When the place seemed sick of death, had to get away from the smell of it, the sight of it.
Give it your best shot.
The women fight alongside the men sometimes. Why they had let her come, I don't. Gave birth there alone, before she died of her wounds. Covered the child with his cloak, with the wind, blown the cloak away.
Appreciate.
Child flew away. Could have been dead too. Crying himself. I couldn't just leave a child.
Give it your best shot.
Always knew you wanted children. I knew you'd take it to your heart, Kari. Rand is good. A good name. His legs lost the little strength they had. Stumbling, he fell to his knees.
My will
Tam
is my
moaned with the jolt,
strength.
and he took his blanket covered to Rand's shoulders, but he was not aware of either. If a Trolloc had leaped up in front of him right then, he would have just stared at him. He looked over his shoulder at Sam, who had sunk back into wordless murmurs. Fever dreams, he thought dully. Fevers always brought bad dreams. And this
Let's
was a
go!
nightmare nightmares,
Best shot.
even without a fever. You are my father, he said aloud, stretching back a hand to touch Tam. And I am... The fever was worse, much worse. Grimly, he struggled to his feet. Tam murmured something, but Rand refused to listen to anymore. Throwing his weight against the improvised harness, he tried to put all of his mind into taking one leaden step after another, into reaching the safety of Emmons Field. But he could not stop the echo in the back of his mind. It was my father. It was just a fever dream. He's my father. It was just a fever dream. Light. Who am I?
The Bouncy have no hold over me!
Brave first flight back while Rand still trudged through the forest. At first, he did not really see. When he finally did, he stared at the fading darkness in surprise. No matter what his eyes told him, he could hardly believe he had spent all night trying to travel the distance from the farm to Emmons Field. Of course, the boy rode by day, rocks and all, with a far cry from the woods by night. On the other hand, it seemed days since he had seen the black-cloaked rider on the road, weeks since he and Tam had gone in for their
Take
supper.
down the enemy.
He no longer felt the strip of cloth digging into his shoulders.
My
And
will
it was
is my
nothing,
strength!
it was just nothing. Nor in his feet, for that matter. In between, it was another matter. His breath came in labored pants that had long since set his throat and lungs burning. Hunger twisted his stomach into queasy sickness. Tam had fallen sorry sometime before. Rand was not sure how long it had been since the murmurs had ceased, but he did not dare halt now to check on Tam. If he stopped, he would never be able to force himself to start out again. Anyway, whatever Tam's condition, he could do nothing beyond what he was doing. He could
Follow
only
my
hope
lead.
for ahead in the village. He tried wearily to increase his pace, but his wooden legs continued their slow plod. He barely even noticed the cold or the wind. Vaguely, he caught the smell of wood smoke. He was almost there.
The Bouncy has no hold
The
over
tired
me!
smile had only begun on his face, though, when it turned to a frown. Smoke lay heavy in
Take
the air.
down the enemy.
Too heavy. With the weather, a fire might well
Give it
be
your
blazing
best
away
shot.
on every hearth in the village, but the smoke was still too strong. In his mind, he saw again the Trollocs on the road. Trollocs coming from the east, in the direction of Emmons Field. He peered ahead, trying to make out the first houses, and ready to shout for help at the first sight of anyone, even send Bowie or one of the coplans. A small voice in the back of his head told him to hope someone there could still give help. Suddenly a house became visible to the last bare branch of trees. It was all he could do to keep his feet going. And hope turning his shot to despair, he staggered into the village. Charred piles of rubble stood in the places of half the houses of Emmons Field. Soot-coated brick chimneys thrust like dirty fingers from heaps of blackened timber. Thin wisps of smoke still rose from the ruins.
Follow my lead.
Grimy-faced villagers, some yet in their night clothes, spoke through the ashes, fearful and pre-cooked pot, there simply prodding forlornly at the wreckage with a stick. What little had been rescued from the flames dotted the streets. Tall mirrors and polished sideboards, high chests, stood in the dust among chairs and tables, buried under bedding, cooking utensils, meager piles of clothing and personal belongings. The destruction seemed scattered at random through the
My
village.
will is my
Houses
strength!
marched untouched in one row, while in another place, a lone survivor stood surrounded by desolation. On the far side of the Wine Spring Water, the three huge Veltine bonfires roared, tended by a cluster of men. Thick columns of black smoke bent northward with the wind, led by glowing sparks.
Careful now.
One of Master Alvira's guard stallions was dragging something Rand could not make out over the ground toward the wagon bridge in the flames. The boy would go out of the trees and pretty-faced Harl Luhan hurried to him, clutching the horseman's back in one thick-fingered hand. The burly blacksmith's ash-smeared nightshirt hung to his boots.
On your guard!
The angry red welt was burned across his chest, showing through a ragged trail. He dropped to one knee beside the litter. Tam's eyes were closed and his breathing came low and hard. Trollocs, boy?
Thank you.
Master Luhan asked in a smoke-hoarse voice. Here too.
Take down the
Here
enemy.
too. Well, we may have been luckier than anyone has a right to be, if you can credit it. He needs the wisdom. Now, where in the light is she? Egwene! Egwene, running by with her arms full of bed sheets torn into bandages, looked around at them without slowing. Her eyes stared at something in the far distance. Dark circles made them appear even larger than they actually were. Then she saw Rand and stopped, drawing a shuddering breath. Oh no, Rand! Not your father! Is he... Come, I'll take you to Nynaeve. Rand was too tired, too stunned to speak. All through the night, Emmons Field had been a haven where he and Tam would be safe. Now all he could seem to do was stare in dismay at her smoke-stained dress. He noticed odd details as if they were very important. The buttons down the back of her dress were done up crookedly, and her hands were clean. He wondered why her hands were clean when smudges of soot marked her cheeks. Master Luhan seemed to understand what had come over him. Laying his axe across the shafts, the blacksmith picked up the rear of the litter and gave it a gentle push, prodding him to follow Egwene. He stumbled after her as if walking in his sleep. Briefly he wondered how Master Luhan knew the creatures were Trollocs, but it was a fleeting thought. If Tam could recognize them, there was no reason why Harald Luhan could not. "All the stories are real," he muttered. "So it seems, lad," the blacksmith said. "So it seems." Rand only half heard. He was concentrating on following Egwene's slender shape. He had pulled himself together just enough to wish she would hurry, though in truth she was keeping her pace to what the two men could manage with their burden. She led them halfway down the green to the